Chapter 93, The Presence, Esau's POV. Esau woke slowly, reluctantly. I'm in bed? Then had the horrible images and emotions flooding back into his mind been a nightmare? He'd never propositioned his master and been turned down, never panicked and cried and fallen apart at Lord Antony's feet. What a relief! Opening his eyes and glancing down at himself put paid to those comforting ideas. He was dressed for the day in clothes he remembered picking out. His eyes and throat were sore from crying, his mouth parched with dehydration. It had all been real. But then, how had he ended up in bed? Lord Antony must have ordered him there. Gods, he couldn't even remember dragging himself into the room. At least he hadn't been too addled to obey. How long had he been asleep? Was Hanyu back yet? Was their lord still there? Esau needed to find him and apologize, though he wasn't sure how he would even begin. He had been unbelievably bold, tried to persuade his master after being told no, had disgraced himself with tears. He was so ugly when he cried. Now Lord Antony would never agree to bed him, and he didn't even know what he'd done or said after a certain point. It all faded into a muddled blur of emotion. He's going to get rid of me. The cold finality of the thought was almost a comfort. Esau had been so stupid all those years when he thought he was worthy to serve Lord Antony. He couldn't even manage 2 weeks in the god service. Lord Marcus had discarded him as well. What options were left? Would anybody take him? Or was he doomed to join the rest of his cadre in the barracks, publicly humiliated before the friends who had always looked up to him? He rolled over, dully determined to find Lord Antony and get it all over with, and saw a cup of water next to the bed. Odd, that hadn't been there before. Was it for him? He was thirsty enough to take the chance, draining it in a few greedy swallows. Hanyu must be back. He must have set out the cup. That was an aspect of the situation that Esau hadn't considered. Hanyu. Would Lord Antony keep him if Hanyu were to plead on his behalf? Esau thought he might. Wonderful. His only hope of salvation rested on the goodwill of a man he'd been snapping and lashing out at for months. His master's voice came from the other side of the door, shattering his thoughts at once. Esau, you can join us out here if you like. Us. Hanyu was definitely back then. That was good. It would be embarrassing to apologize and admit his poor behavior in front of the other man, but at least the chances of Hanyu intervening for him would be improved. Esau breathed deeply and forced himself to open the door. Lord Antony was sitting on the couch, Hanyu kneeling at his feet, but not facing him, which was strange. Esau didn't have time to notice anything more than that before he dropped into his bow and opened his mouth to begin his apologies. Before he could speak so much as a single word, Hanyu started chattering about Kenta and the others. Damn it. He'd been behaving so much better lately, but it seemed he'd reached his limit. He wasn't even letting their master speak, let alone asking permission to speak himself. Esau tensed, awaiting the explosion. But Lord Antony didn't get angry. He didn't even withdraw into the tense, brooding silence that had characterized the last few days. He started conversing with Hanyu, chatting back and forth as if there was nothing unusual about it. Esau, Lord Antony called. Come over here, will you? I'd appreciate it if you could sit next to me and hand me pins. Obeying without pausing to think, Esau was halfway across the room before his mind caught up with his master's words. Pins? He darted a quick glance from under his lashes and saw that the god's dark, slim fingers were in Hanyu's hair, winding a bright strand into a coil. Lord Antony was arranging Hanyu's hair? Why in the world would he do that? The offerings were all perfectly capable of handling such menial tasks themselves, even Hanyu. It wasn't the sort of thing a god needed to concern himself with. Perching wearily on the edge of the sofa, Esau managed a shaky, "Your servant is grateful to be of use, my lord." There was a little cloth bag sitting near Lord Antony, spilling pins and ties onto the couch cushion. Esau took it and began sorting out the pins, resolutely not thinking about the strangeness of the situation. He had a job to do, and that would have to suffice. My lord, Hanyu said, clearly about to call their lord by name. No matter how many times Esau told himself that it was fine, Hanyu had permission, it still sent an icy jolt of fear through his veins. Actually, now that Esau is awake, can I go clean up before you finish fixing my hair? I'm disgusting. Another quick glance showed that Hanyu was indeed a little beraggled. Had he come right from his exercises without washing up? Now that Esau's awake... Oh gods, oh fuck, were they waiting on me? You're not disgusting, Lord Antony growled. Damn it, Hanyu. Of course disgusting was too strong a word. A person had to tread carefully, staying humble without insulting their master's property. Unworthy was a safe choice. Disgusting should only be used in extreme situations when the attendant was already in disgrace. Even as troublesome as Esau had been to Lord Marcus, he'd only felt that it was necessary to call himself disgusting a handful of times, no more than a dozen. Didn't Hanyu have any sense of proportion? Hanyu scrambled to his feet with all the grace of a drunken camel, making Esau wince again. The man was capable of doing better than this if he tried, so why wasn't he trying? Their master was right there. Still, Lord Antony offered no word of reproof. As Hanyu vanished into the bedroom, the god sat quietly, the brush still in his hand. A few yellow strands caught the torchlight. When Lord Antony spoke, his voice was a whisper clearly meant for Esau alone. Are you all right? Shit! All this time, and Esau hadn't apologized yet. He must seem addled. No wonder the god was questioning his fitness to serve. Esau gripped the little bag tighter to hide the trembling of his hands. My lord is kinder than I deserve, Esau managed. I am mortified to have behaved so inexcusably. I am unworthy of my lord's ownership. That's nonsense! Oh, fuck, he was angry. Esau bent his head lower and stifled a whimper. How did he keep getting this so wrong? Should he try asking for punishment again? What I mean is... The god hesitated, then went on speaking. You didn't do anything wrong. You can't help getting upset sometimes. Please don't worry about it anymore. So, he was still coddling Esau. There was no way he was truly excusing such unacceptable behavior. No doubt he was worried that Esau would collapse again if he were reprimanded. Yes, my lord, whispered Esau. After another moment of silence, Lord Antony said, I'm sorry I upset you, but please believe that hurting you would give me no pleasure. What? It's the last thing I want to do, the god went on. He broke off, leaving Esau to puzzle through his words. Even stranger than his master's statement was the tone of his voice, which was almost pleading. Did Esau have it all wrong? Did Lord Antony truly hate giving punishment so much? Was he asking Esau to behave himself so that such measures would be unnecessary? That would explain why he let Hanyu get away with so much. It would also explain the scorn in Lord Marcus's voice when he spoke about Lord Antony. Annie's weak, the big god had said 100 times. He's soft. He's so spoiled he can't help but spoil his toys. Can't bring himself to use them like they're meant to be used. He wouldn't even know what to do with a luscious little thing like you. But I do, don't I, slave? Esau was tugged from his memories by Hanyu's return. The big oaf dropped down on the cushion like he was a heavy bag some careless laborer had let fall, but their lord didn't seem to mind. He just went back to brushing, then styling Hanyu's hair. Handing him pins as he worked, Esau couldn't help sneaking glances at the god. Lord Antony actually seemed to be listening to all of Hanyu's chatter. He interjected comments and questions into the endless stream of words, his quick fingers never pausing in their work. In fact, his shoulders relaxed a little as he wound the tawny locks into rosettes and pinned them in place. Was this calming for him? Esau dared a peek at their master's face. Sure enough, there was an openness in Lord Antony's look, a softness to his mouth that Esau had never seen on his stern visage before. It really did look like weakness, blasphemous as the thought might have been. The god looked strangely young and helpless, and his eyes were fixed on Hanyu with an unwavering intensity that made Esau drop his gaze before he could even worry about being caught. There, the god said. I'm finished. The words spun through Esau's mind in a different voice, a different cadence. I'm finished. Get off the bed now. Wait, stop. Look at this. You bled on my sheets, you filthy little animal. I'll teach you. Hanyu scrambled to his feet. Then it's my turn. You promised. Lord Antony stood up, and Asao was on his knees before he even realized what he was doing, his mind a white haze of terror. He doesn't mean it. We're not being demanding. We can be good. Please let us make it up to you. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Please forgive. Asao, you can stay on the couch. Lord Antony's voice pierced through the panic. You don't have to kneel every time I stand up. He wished he could take the time to compose himself and make sure he was able to show a placid face. However, Asao had his orders. He only indulged in a quick gulp of air before he rose and settled back in his place on the sofa, knotting his fingers together to hide their trembling. Hanyu and Lord Antony had switched places. The god was sitting on the pillow now, while Hanyu looked down at his head, lips pursed in thought. Neither of them were looking at Asao. He exhaled, weak with relief that his little upset hadn't been noticed. Was he going mad? These moments of blind fear, when he couldn't remember where he was or which master owned him, were happening more often. Twice today he'd utterly lost control of himself. What would become of him if he couldn't manage his own mind? He tried to distract himself by watching Hanyu at work. He carefully undid the tie at the bottom of Lord Antony's braid, then teased the strands apart until the god's hair hung loose. It's so pretty, Hanyu breathed, running a reverent hand through the pale waves. Lord Antony shifted a little on the cushion, glowering down at the floor. It's just hair. I don't know why you're so determined to make a fuss. It's beautiful, Hanyu insisted, his tone stubborn. I'm going to see Theo before the sun goes down, the god snapped, abruptly changing the subject. Hanyu gasped delightedly. Can we come? When Asao flinched, he was surprised to see that his master did as well. When Lord Antony spoke, however, his voice was calm and smooth. Of course, we can go right now. Nice try. We're not going anywhere until I'm finished with your hair. Hanyu hesitated, then glanced at Asao and tacked on a guilty-sounding, My lord. He combed out their master's hair for what seemed like an excessively long time, gazing down at the silver strands with a look of tenderness and awe that soothed Asao's nerves a little. He really did seem to revere their lord in his own way, even if there was no fear in his bearing. Was this the sort of service Lord Antony preferred? If so, Asao would do his best to imitate Hanyu, but he couldn't help feeling that it had been simpler to crawl and cower. Lord Marcus had overpowered him in every conceivable way. He had demanded Asao's obedience, his body, his worship, his devotion, but at least he had never wanted Asao to be affectionate with him. Hanyu wove loose, feathery braids back from Lord Antony's temple, creating a strange, ropey waterfall that dropped over the portion of his hair that still hung loose. He pestered Asao for pins, the prettiest ones, and didn't seem very concerned about over-decorating. Hanyu's tastes had always run dangerously close to being garish. Now that the stern priest had been replaced with a master who seemed inclined to let him do whatever he wanted, he seemed to wear brighter clothes and more jewels and trinkets with each passing day, once he was done with his exercises. Today, it seemed, he was determined to make over their lord in his own increasingly glittery image. Hanyu was sliding a bright red pin shaped like a beetle into Lord Antony's hair when a knock sounded at the door. Immediately, Asao leapt to his feet, pitifully grateful for a chance to be of use. Lord Julia stood in the hallway, her ever-present bag of remedies in hand, her stern face softening a little when she saw him. Hello, Asao. Her voice was brisk, but Asao had noticed over the days of his recovery that she was much sharper when she spoke to Lord Antony and Hanyu. It's good to see you up and about. Here to check on your patients? His lord called. Come on in. She swept past Asao with her usual quick, purposeful strides. Hello, you two. Goodness, Antony, I haven't seen you looking so festive in quite some time. Lord Antony groaned. What's he doing to me? That's for me to know and you to find out, my lord, Hanyu told him placidly, securing a little braid with a red ribbon. Theo's going to laugh her head off, muttered the god. If you have plans to go visiting, I'll be brief, Lord Julia said. Asau, may I take a look at your finger? Asau glanced at his master, who nodded permission, then offered his injured hand to the god. My lord. She undid the wrappings with quick, efficient movements. Asau winced when he saw how pale and soft the skin underneath had become, but at least the offending digit looked straight. It had been crooked after Lord Marcus had since the injury. But the night Lord Antony got beaten and Lord Theodora took them both away, the healer had given him a strong, bitter drink that made his head spin and then realigned the bones. Now the bruises were yellowing, and the finger sat straight against its tiny splint. Wonderful, Lord Julia said, giving him a small, closed-mouthed smile. You've clearly been following directions. In a few weeks you'll be good as new. Thank you, my lord, Asau ventured as she bound the finger to his neighbors with fresh wrappings. He'd learned his lesson about claiming he didn't deserve her help, though the feeling lingered. His finger had been maimed as a lesson. What good was all that anguish if it was then allowed to heal good as new? I brought you more ointment. She handed him a jar. You should be nearly out if you're using as much as I told you to. I am, my lord, Asau assured her. It was true. He might be tempted to skimp on some of the other remedies she showered him with, but not this particular balm. He might get tense and nervous as he reached between his legs twice a day to apply it, but there was no denying its efficiency. He could almost walk and sit normally now. And finally, Lord Julia reached into her bag and drew out 2 glittering objects, handing one to Asau and then turning to give the other to Hanyu. Some gifts with no medical application whatsoever. Thank you, my lord, Asau said automatically, his voice lost in Hanyu's cry of, Oh, thank you! It's wonderful, my lord! Lord Julia put her hands up. I am merely the messenger. Thad and Cloelia made them. I'm not the crafty one of the family. What, no presents for me? Lord Antony pouted theatrically. Too bad for you. Lord Julia shrugged. You've never admired Thad's tooth collection. This is what you get. Nothing. Well, if I don't get a present, can I at least ask a favor? Their lord's voice was less teasing now, and Asau tensed involuntarily. It's time for Sinisa's visit to the elves. Can you handle that? I don't think I could overpower him right now if things got out of hand. Lord Julia rolled her eyes. That big lug? Of course I can. I'll go find him right now. Have a good evening, everyone. As soon as she was gone, Hanyu badgered Asau into coming back to the sofa so they could look at each other's prizes. Hanyu had a necklace, a strand of blue and green beads with gold wire wrapped around them, leading down to a perfect white triangle that Asau recognized after a moment as one of the sea serpent teeth. Antony, look! Hanyu gushed, dangling the necklace down so their master could see it. Isn't it pretty? Then, frowning a little at Asau's palm, I wonder why yours is so... It doesn't seem fair. It's perfect, Asau breathed, staring down at his own prize. His necklace was a plain black cord hung with the lean, wicked point of a Flavia shark tooth. He also had a single earring, another Flavia tooth, but this one was wrapped in silver wire. It dangled several inches below the hook, and the wire between the hook and the tooth had been pressed into sharp little spikes. Both pieces looked more like weapons than ornaments. A necklace that I can slide into my robes and keep close to my heart like a secret. An earring that I can fasten right next to my face and show the world like a challenge. One of each so I can choose every day. Asau thought back to the moment he'd first held the tooth. He wondered which of these it had been, and dreamed of being ugly and fierce. He remembered the canny way Lord Thaddeus had looked at him, and all at once he wasn't sure whether to be delighted or terrified by this wonderful, perfect gift. Now that he wasn't the temple's best or Lord Marcus's submissive toy, Asau wasn't sure he himself knew what he was anymore. That made it even more frightening to feel suddenly that for one moment he had been truly seen.